We are working to ensure that all council members, and especially members of the Metro Budget and Finance Committee, and all our citizens have the opportunity to learn in detail what is in the Metro budget and how that whole process works. So we have been meeting for several weeks now, and we spent the month of December looking at where the money comes from and learned that the biggest part is from property taxes, and after that is local option sales tax. And now in the month of January, we have been looking at where the city spends that money in our $2.64 billion budget. So we began with education, which is the largest chunk. 2 weeks ago, last week, we now we are looking at public safety and justice, which is the next big chunk of our budget. That's 20% of the budget. We've seen some numbers from organizations that have implied that's a bigger piece of this. So I want to be sure that people have good numbers and understand where our priorities are, which is to some degree indicated by how we divide that up. And in future weeks, then we will talk about general government, health and social services, infrastructure and recreation will be next week. And then the breakdown, so here's the schedule that we followed. So next week will be NDOT, parks, health and social services, and then finally the last week in January we'll talk about debt service and general government. And then in February we will have a number of panels. It's possible that we will be in a position where we can meet with a larger chunk of public participation and not depend as heavily on the virtual. But we are grateful now that we have the opportunity, as we're trying to keep everybody safe, to do as much of this online as possible. And again, just for context, I want to break down that 20% of our budget that is public safety, how that in turn is broken down by the major factors within that. So we'll hear first from police, which, as you can see, is the largest sector there on the right, and then the sheriff and the fire department are also large pieces of that, and then the courts, of which there are a number of different ones, and I cannot begin to explain all the different courts there are, so I will hope that perhaps Judge Calloway can sort of give the context for how her juvenile court fits in with all the other courts that are part of the Metro budget. But that being said, what I would like to do now is invite Chief Drake from the Metro Police Department to come and explain how his part of the budget is being used to protect our citizens and also to provide other services that he'll explain. And we will have, if there are questions from the audience, if you will please write them on the note cards that are there on the lectern, then we will collect those and ask those after each speaker. So thank you for our audience participation as well. Chief Drake, I'll turn it over to you.
Good evening, and thank you, Council Lady Allen. And on behalf of the 1,900 employees of the Metropolitan Police Department, I'm pleased to be here to present our $236 million budget that is housed in the three core pillars of our police department. The first pillar is organizational excellence. That's something that we dearly believe in, that we bring in the right people, we vet them, and we train them to a standard, and at every single level in our police department, we train them to be a better employee. And also how we interact and mix and mingle with our community and the product that we serve for the Nashville community. We use it as a standard of excellence, and that's the goal that we strive for. Also, community engagement. How do we get to know people? How do people get to know us? And then that's an effective tool in how we reduce crime as well. I remember years ago going to a calls for service. There was several shots that had been fired, trying to get information in a community and couldn't get anything at all. Fast forward to the day when we have situations that occur, people are coming forward at the scene, calling, going to Crime Stopper tips, et cetera, has been very, very effective. The goal of community engagement is to empower the community. It's better for the community to tell us what's going on in their community than for us to tell them what's going on. At the same time, with all the things that we're doing, engaging the community and doing a lot of the good deeds and collaborations, we also know there's people out there creating harms in the community. And that's where precision policing comes in. Now, we realize that for years, arresting our way out of it is not going to be the way that we're going to reduce crime, but we also know that we're not going to be able to saturate neighborhoods. And that's where precision policing come in, is a do no harm approach. We identify the individuals who are committing the crimes, and then we effectively do something with that individual, whether it's through arrest or whether it's through diversion. We started the Office of Alternative Policing Strategies. That would be group violence intervention, the mental health co-response, juvenile diversion, and others. I mentioned the 1,900 employees early on because 90% of our budget is people. Today, we have 1,375 sworn police officers, 333 persons on our professional support staff, and 105 part-time school crossing guards. Currently, we're understaffed by 183 police officers, and we are diligently working to hire qualified men and women to help train in our classes during 2022. 2 classes are in the academy right now. We'll have 43 trainees set to graduate next month. And if I can, I want to take this opportunity to remind everyone that the Nashville Police Department is hiring. And anyone is watching this and looking for a rewarding career in public service, or if you know someone, please visit joinmnpd.com. Even though we're understaffed, the men and women of our police department do incredible work. In 2021, we responded to over 258,000 calls for service. At the same time, we had where other major cities across the country witnessed increases in crime, we had an overall drop in crime by 7.5%, which is significant. Our property crime last year was down nearly 11% as well compared to 2020. Violent crime, however, is something that continues to be something that we continue to focus on. We had an increase of 4%, largely fueled by aggravated assaults, half of which involve firearms. This remains a critical focus of our precision policing efforts. The subject of firearms is something that I'm greatly concerned about, as last year we had over 1,307 guns stolen from parked vehicles in our city last year. That is more than double from what we had in 2017. We have been discussing and will continue to use new ways to have individuals secure their valuables, secure weapons in their vehicles, and not become the victim of a crime. Another area that I mentioned just recently, our pilot co-response crisis intervention partnership, or the mental health co-op. We launched at the end of June. It's going very, very well. As you know, officers and mental health clinicians are partnering together in the Hermitage and North precincts. Since we began, we responded to 841 incidents. Meeting the criteria for crisis intervention response was 472 calls for service in Hermitage precinct and 369 in the North precinct. Responders were able to facilitate and access services to persons who needed them. Most importantly, officers responded to individuals where 153 who would have been arrested were actually de-escalated by 78%, and only 33 of those were arrested. That is a very good number as we continue to try to improve on that. And imagine, we're not putting people in a facility, a criminal facility, we're putting them in a medical facility to get them help. I do envision expanding this program in the future, as the first 6 months has been a clear success for our organization. Moving forward, I'm continuously evolving precision policing and community engagement strategies to enhance public safety throughout the city. Just today, I announced the Office of Crime Control Strategies. It's a big picture view of how we are going to look at violent crime in our city and how we're going to have a even bigger approach and emphasis on violent crime. In a constantly growing city like ours with more than 500 square miles, it's important that we are able to identify significant crime issues early on and quickly develop a precision police plan to prevent victimization. Also today, I announced the creation of the Police Activities League. As you know, in my career, I did the Police Athletic League, and it was one of the most rewarding jobs that I've ever done. But with the Police Activities League, we're going beyond athletics, and we're going to find kids who have an interest in art and in music and other endeavors to use it as the hook to engage them, but not only engage them, but engage the parents as well. I feel that's something that Nashville is greatly missing. It's something that we need to provide a little more direction for our kids in this city. I've been in communications with Judge Calloway and with Dr. Battle from Juvenile Court and with schools respectively on how we can partner together to further help kids through not only initiatives that they have, but also through our Police Activities League. I would expect that we're going to have parents, and I think this is a focal issue of what we need to work on as well as we work with kids in the community, is that as we engage them, we can help parents who really may have lost touch with some of their kids, who may have lost control. They're looking for avenues or direction to where they can help these kids as well. And anytime I see kids 11 and 12 years old out at 3 a.m. in a stolen car with a stolen gun, to me, not only do they need help, but the parents need help as well. In the next fiscal year, we'll be asking for the council's support in a number of areas, including the creation of a paid internship program in partnership with colleges and universities to increase funding for funding for the Entertainment District Initiative. As Nashville continues to showcase itself on the national and the world stage, we were asked to increase our school crossing guards as well so that we can have a retention for them. We're about 50 school crossing guards short. Thank you again for allowing me to be here. I know you have some questions, but we have been diligent working with less and making great strides and improving the public safety in our community.
Thank you so much. I expect we probably do have some questions in the back. If my vice chair can head back there and see if there are any of those white note cards. I have one that came in through email that I'll go ahead and ask while we're checking to see if there are any from the back, which was, Chief Drake, it's clear that your team is working very hard 24/7 responding to serious crime. What are ways where the police can alternate between that and then prevention? You've talked to some degree about that, but prevention non-emergency calls so that they don't escalate and become violent crimes or burglaries as well.
Yeah, so one of the biggest ways is we started a quality of life program, and that's to work with our unhoused individuals in the community, not to arrest someone for being unhoused or having a problem, but also how we can help them. And so we engage those individuals to connect them to services, to get them driver's license, identifications, connect them to wraparound services to help get them off the street as well. We're also looking at juvenile diversion because we're not going to be able to, kids that are looking to break in a vehicle, get a little bit of change, and then wind up having a gun and et cetera, go out and commit more crime. So what are we looking at here is having more community engagement with kids, our school resource officers delving down into the elementary school areas so we can talk about prevention, but then also how we can engage the older groups as well through our Police Activities League and through other endeavors such as that. The mental health co-response is a great way of how we're looking to stop that as well. It's not a criminal offense to have a mental health crisis, and how we can help those individuals as well by diverting them into services for help. And we have a lot more endeavors that we're working on as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And then a related question is, can you suggest ways that that MNPD might be able to shorten response time for non-emergency calls?
So one of the ways that we're looking to shorten response times is, one, we're looking at electronic reporting. If someone has a bicycle that they left out in the yard and they need to report it as stolen, but they really don't want to wait for a police car, really shouldn't have to wait for one. They can have a report done online. Another way is that we have the 4 10-hour shifts. We're going to have the overlapping of our police units. And so at the peak times when crimes are occurring or when people need calls for service, we'll have double the manpower to respond at the peak times. We also have precision policing. It's an initiative where we have a rapid response where officers are staged, they're working in a particular area, and as calls for service come in, they respond to those areas of town. For instance, we may have 20 officers in precision policing. They may be in the West Nashville area of town, but South Nashville has an influx of calls. Those officers will go to respond to that area. And that's an effective way of how we've learned to do a lot more with less.
We appreciate that. Thank you. Councilmember Suara.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you for being here and for all that you're working on and trying to do with your team. I've seen Officer or Captain Carlos Lara in the community, and I know that he's working hard. I have 3 questions here. The first one is about the guns in the car. I think it's very disheartening every time we get the report. And some of these cars are actually cars that were left unlocked, where people just leave their cars unlocked and then somebody steals the gun and something happened. Are we looking into ways, and I don't know if there's a legal way to make the people hide into the crime be responsible for it? Is that something that is possible? Because, I mean, if you leave your keys there and somebody steals the gun and commit a crime, and you can tie that crime back to your gun that you left carelessly in your car, shouldn't something be done about that, especially since we're seeing an increase in violent crimes?
I totally agree. That's a great question, and I've had several forums where I've had to discuss that. And right now, if someone leaves a gun, I call that an irresponsible gun owner. And it doesn't matter if you're a normal citizen or a police officer or whoever, but if you leave a gun in a vehicle and it's stolen, it's going to be used in a crime later. It's going to be used in a robbery or any other kind of crime. And right now, I've talked to some state legislators. I think that's where it starts. We've had some meetings internally through the police department on how we can message out more about securing valuables in your vehicles and securing guns as well, and not having them and not becoming a victim of crime. We're also working to put signage up in different areas of town where right underneath a stop sign at an intersection, it may say, secure your valuables, don't leave guns in vehicles, and put those all through town to message that even more. It's going to take a community effort, and it's going to take at a state level to make this a crime. Right now, they're just punishing the individuals who are stealing the guns, and the people that are leaving them in the vehicles are getting largely, in my opinion, left off the hook, and it's definitely something that we have to do more with. So.
Thank you. My next question is on the school resource officers. I watched the hearing on public safety by the Metro Human Relations Commission, and this was an area of concern. It's always been an area of concern of mine. I've had students that said they're really scared of the school resource officers. I also think that when we treat children as criminal, they will behave as criminal. And I think this is something that I think we need to start reducing rather than increasing in our school. What is your take on that?
So my take is, it's just like the police athletic league or police activities league, kids that I interacted with still love me today. They don't see me as Chief Drake, they see me as Officer Drake. They get excited. The same thing with school resource officers. They're invested with these kids. If we didn't have school resource officers and kids, we've recovered 9 guns so far this year, and not including any pellet guns. So what we would have is more shootings in some of the schools. the officers are not there just to be an enforcement model, but we've turned that around to where they can engage kids, where they can talk about human trafficking, they can talk about domestic violence. We're starting a pilot program at Pearl Cone High School on how we can talk about domestic violence and how you don't become a victim of crime, and also with human trafficking, what people look for and how we can educate more. There have been, I guess, ways in the past where there may have been an adverse, I guess, when interaction between a police officer or school resource officer and a kid, but that's very rare. They're there, they're invested to help these kids, and that's my take. And I think as we even look to change this model even more, it's going to be even better for the community.
Thank you. I do think that one bad experience can actually send a child the wrong way. I think that's where the school-to-prison pipeline thing gets increased, and I think that when it does go wrong, it really does go wrong. So it brings me to my last and final question. I think I love that the officers are being trained and they're being shown how to do things. I love our community efforts, the alternative policing strategies. I love all of that. But the fact of the matter is that when you see a policeman, he's still a policeman, right? And the thoughts and the way you view a policeman, for many people, is still scary. I mean, that is the fact of it. So what do you think that all of these ideas are great, but do they have to be housed in the police department? Does it have to be an MMPD initiative? The mental health, can it not be with the health department? The one about the kids, the athletic league, can it not be with parks? And that way you're having people that deals with this issue being the one that are leading it. We can still use our police officers that were citizens and they have a role to play in there. But does it have to be MMPD-led and MMPD funded? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So let's start with the police, with the mental health co-response. We've looked at that and having it not housed with the police department. We think right now the best practice, and we've talked to the mental health professionals, we talked to the mental health co-op, who said that they think this is the best practice at the time. Right now it's largely successful. It's doing very well, and we're looking to expand it. But we've also had conversations of what does the future look like? What does it look like on down the road if we have a version where the health department takes care of that? I've had conversations with Chief Swan and how we can do that as well. I've had conversations with Director Martini. So when someone calls for service and they get Metro Police Fire and Medical, they get called Metro Police Fire, Medical, and Mental Health. And so now we know exactly who to send and where, and so it can be actually on down the road if we have something that the clinicians and the partners in care feel is efficient, will definitely be something that we'll go with if they feel that's the best approach. Also, when we look at the school resource officers, that right now is the best practice. If we had another avenue to where people could come in and be, if they could prove they could be more effective with kids, I don't see that, but I see, we would definitely entertain that. But when it comes to the Police Athletic League, that's what we want. We want kids to get to know police officers, and we want police officers to get to know kids. I dealt with the program for almost 15 years of my career, and I tell people that had the Police Athletic League never ended, I wouldn't be police chief today. I would have stayed an officer. I would have kept working with kids. Kids that still love me today. There are kids that are in professional sports. There's kids that are teachers, principals, even a young man who's a police officer in Atlanta. He had an incident where he was grazed by a bullet on his forehead, engaging a violent suspect. And one of the first people he called was me. It's like a second father. Have kids now that are playing overseas in basketball. And so the connection is there. But even with that, we've had communications with parks, to partner with parks, and to partner with others and how we can make this work together. We've talked about a citywide program where officers will go in plain clothes. they're engaged kids to have basketball or whatever in a citywide endeavor, and then at the end, they see them as police officers. To me, I've done this profession for March, it'd be 34 years. And I think, that I've done a lot of good, and that's what we're looking to do with our police officers, to make sure that they're not only liked and respected, but they respect and like people just equally. And that's the whole gist of community engagement is we get to know them, they get to know us, and you're not the object of a business transaction, but you're actually dealing with individuals who trust you and like you. And so that's really my take on that.
I think that's important.
you.
I want to make sure we have time for the sheriff and for Judge Callaway, who I see has a question for, is that for Chief Drake? Oh, all right, we'll take this one more question, and then we'll move on to the sheriff. If we can make this a quick one, I want to make sure the other two get their fair share.
What are some of the ways that the police department is helping with traffic or traffic fatalities or pedestrian fatalities?
So we've been looking at, thank you for that question, by the way. We've been looking at fatalities with automobiles and with pedestrians for some time. We're looking at high traffic crash areas, intersections, and we're deploying resources. We started a countywide motors unit to go into areas where we're having more crashes, to do enforcement, to slow down areas. We're doing community engagement to tell people to slow down in areas. We've improved lighting where we know there's been more traffic crashes as well. And then we started a traffic unit dedicated just to working with fatalities, whether it's vehicular or pedestrian. And we put a captain, and that's their sole responsibility, is to try to prevent more crashes and more fatalities.
Thank you. Good question. Chief Drake, I think we could go on for a long time, and sorry we have to cut you short, but if folks have other questions, we can forward them and try to get those answers back to you. We appreciate all you do and appreciate you being here, and we'll do this again during budget hearings, but I think I wanted to make sure we had the opportunity to do this in the context of the public safety grouping. So thank you so much, and I will now ask Sheriff Darren Hall to come up and tell us a little bit about how your department figures also into this public safety
Thank you.
piece. Thank you so much. Welcome. I'm gonna turn you loose. You can
Are we ready to go?
just go for it.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here. I've been up here many times for budget hearings. I guess this is my 20th year as the sheriff, and but I appreciate the opportunity to come in a different forum, a little different format instead of walking line by line. But just to give an overview, a lot of people are confused about what the sheriff does in Nashville, and as hard as we work, sometimes it's still a little confusing. So it's a good opportunity to try to explain some of the things that we do. The sheriff's office consists of about a $100 million budget. We have 1,000 employees. Extremely proud of that. We have the most racially diverse organization in the city, and we have for many years. It's a part of a mission statement we designed over 20 years ago, and we live by our mission statement. I'm very proud of that. And I think just to put it in perspective, as a philosophy in Nashville, the sheriff's office doesn't have the authority to arrest people. That's unique compared to other communities. But I like to tell people that the police are charged with arresting the person, and we're trying to arrest the problem. What does that mean? That once the person arrives at our door, we take them from the police department, and everything else that happens, they are within our custody. And there's a lot that happens. We see babies born, and we see lives end. We see people turn out to be innocent and released, and we see people convicted of life sentences and more. and all sorts of things go on in the world of the custody of many people. I like to tell people we're running a small city in ourselves, and there's a lot that goes into that on a daily basis. One of the things I think that's important, though, to know, I've been here a long time, over 30 years in the sheriff's office and 20 years as the elected sheriff. We're sitting here tonight, one of the few cities in the country that can tell you that we have 50% of our beds are vacant. And most cities built like we did years ago, and most cities are continuing to see those beds full. I think the good news is that over those years, there's been a lot of reform efforts by a lot of different people that are starting to see some effect, I think, in our population. That's important, it's good, but we have challenges moving forward. There's no secret about that. I wrote a letter, and it will be coming to the council members over the next week or so, and I've probably done that once or twice in 20 years. But we face crisis in what I do and what we do. Over those years, some of those were facilities that were in bad shape. And we've had other emergency type of crisis. But in my 20 years as being the sheriff, the most significant crisis we face is today. It is our staffing. It is hiring people in a line of work that is incredibly difficult to do. The police department, Chief Drake just mentioned that there are percentages of people that they're missing. He and I have talked about this before. We have a third of our staff that are vacant today. 33% of the correctional officers in our city are vacant positions. That is 3 times the number it was just 2 years ago. Why is that important? It's important because we don't get to just shut the post down. There are people there who need to be fed and secured and taken to court, and obviously in a medical facility and others. We don't have an option to shut a zone down or shut a position down. So we're either paying people. Just a few days ago, it snowed, and I was buying hotel rooms to keep the staff that were there a place to sleep because I can't have you go home. It has to be addressed. The Department of Corrections in our state just a week or two ago, right before Christmas actually, enhanced the salaries of the correctional officers by 37%. That is worthy. It is the right thing to do. It is a shame what they were being paid. The good news is they're being paid correctly. The bad news is we're now the lowest paying place there is. And we as a city have got to commit to fixing that. It is a lot more expensive to house a person than it is to arrest them. It's more dangerous to arrest them. It's more complicated and complex to house them. And so as the city moves forward with enhancements of various efforts, we have got to be at the table and agreeing to support the men and women who are working in jails and prisons right now in our country. I could tell you as we sit here, there are 400 inmates that are positive with COVID. There are 400 other ones we're awaiting results on. There's 800 men and women who are restricted. They cannot move around. And what that means is, and our staff are also equally spread thin in trying to manage not only the pandemic, but what is a very, very difficult type of work. Our recruiting efforts for the last 18 months or so has been extremely aggressive. We have been doing everything I know possible and anything you can recommend to us to hire and find people to come and do this very difficult line of work. It is a safety issue. It is a life issue for men and women who are in custody and also the men and women who work there. And so I have met with the mayor. I'm mailing and emailing out to the city council. I'm going everywhere I can over the next several weeks because our men and women who are doing this deserve to be paid what they deserve. And we're going to fight like everything to try to get that done. It is needed now, and I've been here 20 years. I've never said that. So it's important. It's important because the work that we're trying to do when the person who is in custody with us, as I like to say, we're trying to arrest the problem. And what does that mean? We're trying to assess your need and trying to do what we can to reduce the chance that you come back to us, reduce the chance that the police are ever called again. I'm not saying that's successful every time. I'm telling you we try it every time. And I read the book Helter Skelter when I was 16 years old, and I wanted to understand why a man in California could motivate people to go murder people. His name was Charles Manson, and I've always been driven by, if we figured out why he did it, maybe we could reduce the chance anyone else ever did. Well, I've been here a long time, and I can tell you why most people commit crime. It's not that complicated. 90% of the people arrested today are addicted to a substance when they arrive. That's not an excuse. That's not somebody's lawyer making that up or girlfriend or mama. It's the truth. The truth is they're addicted because they're drinking 3 bottles of vodka yesterday. There's 40% of the people coming in our jail doors today that are diagnosed mentally ill. What's wrong with that? No other modern country in the world does that. And when a person is diagnosed mentally ill, that's not my jail staff doing that. That is a mental health expert evaluating the person upon arrival. I've been screaming mental health longer than most people know what that word means. We live with the people who are mentally ill coming inside of a jail system. They do not need to be on the streets. Our streets need to be safe. And if the only place our country is going to allow them to come, it's a sad day. But the police are blamed for it, and they shouldn't be. They're called by the public to solve a naked man in the park. So when you solve that problem, what you do is you have to take him out of the park. There's an effort, the co-response model. I hope it works. I'm all for it. The reality is most people who are mentally ill who come into jail already have a warrant for them. I've been telling people this for years. The reality is you can do all you want in co-response. I'm for it. I support it. I'll help you. But there are still people you're going to have to bring to the jail that are mentally ill that don't belong there in a jail setting. So what we did was we built a behavioral care center. 8 years ago when we were having elections for a mental health judge, I said, whoever wins, will you meet with me the day after the election? And for 8 years we've been working because those elections are now coming back around. We built a facility that when the police department's called and has to make that arrest and they arrive at our front door, we decriminalize the arrest. We take the person, hand them into the hands of the mental health staff, and they are now decriminalizing the arrest of the person who was brought there. One of these days, and I think the question came up earlier, one of these days that whole facility needs to be in the hands of mental health. But don't forget, right now they're called by the public. The police arrive. They don't have the discretion that people ask them to have because there is a warrant. And that warrant often says failure to appear or failure for probation violation. Therefore, you're returning that person to jail, and when they arrive where we live, we want them handed in the hands of mental health. And so one of these days, that building won't be built by the sheriff. It won't be overseen by the sheriff. And maybe our country, not just Nashville, will see it for what it is. Most modern countries would not force the criminal justice system to take that into its responsibility. And unfortunately, the men and women who do what we do have a tough enough job. Now we're asking them oftentimes to interpret between behavior and illness. And it's an unfortunate part of where we are. One of these days, as I said before, the addiction of people coming in and out of the system will be handled in a non-criminal justice way. But it's not the police fault. There's no alternative to call to the scene of someone who is shooting up heroin in the back of a building. The reality is that person is unconscious oftentimes, called by the public, the police arrive, then they're brought to me. And so if all we do is arrest the person, all we're going to do is release an addicted heroin addict. And so our goal is to arrest the product of addiction. It's not easy. It's not going to be easy to do. But I hope our community is set to do something other than just arrest that person. In the last many months, I can tell you that not only COVID, we can move that to the side, our agency has been through the most dramatic shifts in what we do in my 20 years. One of the things that happened as a result of this body is that we ended a contract with Core Civic, which was primarily a prison housing people of 1 to 6 years. In the middle of the pandemic, in the middle of the summer, in a relationship between a private vendor and this council, they decided to end the private contract. And my staff, without really the time to do it, had to take on 90 days of overseeing a prison and taking in that population into our existing jails. And then the very next month, we had to shut down the facility, the building they were in. I just want our staff to get credit for that. That's about a 2-year process to do that. The men and women who work in what we do in the middle of a COVID pandemic, in the middle of a crisis, really deserve a lot of credit. And the fact that we didn't have incidents and events when you're really changing a whole lot of the way we operate says a lot about the men and women who we have working there. And so there's a lot going on as it relates to that population. They're now within our custody. They're serving 1 to 6 year sentences, and we are negotiating, we being the county and the state, on how much reimbursement we will actually see as a city. It's a question I get all the time, including the finance department here and the mayor's office, because I think myself, at least philosophically, and I believe the city is going to have to decide, do we want to be doing the state's job if they're not going to pay us what it costs to do it? So that's something that we're going to have to await, I think, the results of those numbers moving forward. I guess I would like to wrap up with explaining the population's going down, the difficulty within that population's going up. The reality of the mental health crisis within our numbers is real. And at the same time, we're having difficult times recruiting into this line of work. The Department of Corrections is one thing. They raise their pay. CoreCivic is no longer here. We used to get cherry pick from other correctional agencies because we were the better paying organization, and we are a model agency in this country for what we do. But we can't compete with young people wanting to go to work somewhere when we're paying them under what every person who does what we do makes. So we're going to have to force, I hope, that conversation and be able to get people to come and do a very difficult line of work. So, Madam Chair, I think that's my overview.
Thank you. I appreciate that. My vice chair is looking to see if there are any questions from the back. I think we have one being handed. Thank you. And I will say again how impressed we were, because you did give us a very thorough report of what it would take to make an orderly transition if we ended the contract with CoreCivic and then proceeded to do it in a fraction of the time that you said you needed. So we certainly encourage you to let us know what you need to continue to do that amazing job. Councilmember Smora.
So with your experience and all that you've said, what is something that we are not doing to address issues that result in incarceration? How much do you think that will cost? And which department will be best to lead that initiative? Wow.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I break it up like this. I've always wanted to know why people do what they do. 90% of that's addiction. And if our country would focus on the whole crisis of addiction, the need for service of the police department, the need for jail beds drastically changes if you can arrest that problem. I tell this story a lot. I was 18 years old. I asked for two things. I wanted to ride with a police officer. He had to be 18 back then. I wanted to visit a prison. And I did both. I went out here to the thing called the Walls, and I walked through there as an 18-year-old person. And I remember them touring me through the housing units and going through the rec yards and going through what, if you're 18 and never been to a prison, I was really intrigued with that. And I remember they opened these doors up, and there was these men basically working in an assembly line plant making license plates. And I remember carrying that conversation because it kind of intrigued me. There's all this equipment and all these people making these metal presses. And so I was 18, and I back then, if I'm honest with you, I think whether it was in my community or generally or the public, I think it was, well, good, that gives something to do and probably saves money on license plates. I can't articulate that, but I bet you that's what I felt, and I think society would probably admit that. The reality is some 30 or 40 years later, I'm sitting here telling you we released a bunch of addicted license plate makers. What does that mean? License plates aren't something you can just go learn to make when you get out. And if you're addicted, you're not going to keep your job anyway. And so if the focus is only about doing time and not arresting what really sent you to prison or jail, we're going to keep rearresting people. And so I believe addiction is the largest part of it. But I think the issue, I've already mentioned it, mental health is the 40%er. And there's multiple duly diagnosed in these numbers. The difference is I lived in Australia and worked in a prison system there. I've traveled around the world. I was the president of the American Correctional Association. I was the president of the National Sheriff's Association. I've traveled throughout this world. The reality is we're the only modern country in the world that would arrest a naked man in the park. It's not the police fault. We call the police because there's not an alternative. When they get there and the police have a warrant, they don't have the discretion. So the police officer must make the arrest. They bring them to a place called the jail. The jails are built in a horrible way to do anything about a person who's suffering from anxiety. So if we would quit blaming the police, if we would quit, and I'm not saying anybody personally, but we got to set up, the community calls the police. In other countries, you call for help. The challenge to anybody that's listening to this is this. If you walk out in a parking lot and someone grabs their heart and falls over, we're trained, conditioned to call 911 for an ambulance. If you walk out in the parking lot and see a naked man playing a guitar and singing to Elvis Flying Over, I bet you're going to call 911, and I bet you we're conditioned to think we need the police to solve that. Now, 911 operators obviously can be trained, but we don't have the avenue for someone other than the police to arrive, and the community demands the naked man to be taken away. In other countries, we see that naked man is needing help, and that person goes somewhere else. And so if we sit down and have a conversation less about who's failing at what they do and saying, how can we fix that? And I've said this many a times, it doesn't go over well with some of my colleagues. Take 30% of my money. Don't call it defund the police, though. Take 30% of my money and put it in a pile, and promise me you won't bring me anyone else who's mentally ill, and we're on the same page. The reality is, if we're blaming each other, we're not going to get that done. And I don't think jails should be built to house mentally ill people. That's why I built a behavioral care center with money that they gave me to build a jail with. But one of these days, you won't have to do that. I hope this country moves from blaming people and says, let's build where and what it needs, and hopefully we can get something done about it.
Powerful answer. I appreciate that. One more question, and then we want to move to Judge Callaway. Thank you for.
Thank you, Sheriff. I think you're saying what a lot of us are trying to say as well. Two quick questions. On the individuals that are in the behavioral health building that you have, do you have a way for expunging the record, or does it stay with them? And then the second question is this is the budget side in me. You said that the population is down 50%. We have a shortage of staff and the salaries is low. So if we have less people in, do we need less staff? And we can take the money we're saving from the less staff to increase the salaries of the one that we need?
I'm going to answer that one first. I like that a lot better. I need a champion. I need Councilwoman Sora to help me. Here's why. Our budget we're sitting in now, we gave $1 million back. We cut our budget last year $1 million because our population's down. I need that $1 million to go back and pay the ones that are working there more money. We need less people, but the ones that are there need more money. And that's exactly where I want to go. I mentioned this a year ago. We brought our budget forward. We reduced our budget $1 million. We saved that based on the population going down. I don't need more staff. And by the way, this is a civil service issue. I need to be able to pay those people that are over there right now enough money to keep them, and so I can go recruit. Our HR director's in the back of the room. He will tell you this is an incredible challenge when you're walking in and everyone's kind of got more, offering more money. And for the first time, I used to come up here and beg for positions because we were short-staffed. 15 years ago. I have all the positions I need. I need to be able to pay the ones that are there the money they deserve to keep them. And again, it's an important question. We saved money by building better buildings and reducing our population because of the programs we're offering. The truth is that money has come back to the city, and now I'm going to have to come back and say, I need money, not more people, but to be able to pay the ones that I have. I think that the other issue about, and it's really important, if Chief Drake's staff bring a person tonight to the booking room, let's call him a naked man in the park. Let's call him an indecent exposure and a failure to appear in a probation violation. What happens to that person when they arrive? They're assessed by a master's level mental health clinician in the booking room. We're the only jail in America where the first person you see is a mental health clinician. When that happens, if the assessment determines your acuity level of mental health is qualifying, meaning you're able to receive treatment, and your charges are eligible, determined by the DA's office, that is reviewed and automatically moved into the behavioral care center. I'm not a lawyer, but I've learned enough in the terminology of all this over the years. That case is then nollied. What does that mean? Upon just going through the mental health program, the case is nollied, expunged is a fancier word too. It's done every morning in our facility with the DA's office and our staff going to the courts and saying, this person is in mental health, let's dissolve the arrest. So that was our goal.
I think that's some positive stuff, and thank you for warning us ahead of time, but you got two champions here, so thank you for explaining.
Is this recorded, by the way?
It is recorded. You can point to it. I think just in the interest of time, again, we could go on forever with this, and we appreciate all the great information you've given us, and it is so helpful because most of us don't truly understand the difference between what the sheriff does and the police, so this is very helpful. And now I want to hear from one of our judges to talk about what happens when someone goes from the jail to then having to go to the court. So thank you so much. So we have Judge Sheila Callaway and Lionel Matthews, our juvenile court judge and juvenile court clerk. This is one of a number of courts, but it's the one that I am incredibly impressed with. And so you're speaking for all courts, if you don't mind, if you'll just kind of give us a big over picture, but then specifically to talk about what you were doing to, again, help us break the school to prison pipeline, which is the way we get the population down in these areas. So Judge Callaway, you are recognized.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having us here. I greatly appreciate this opportunity to talk about particularly juvenile court, but the courts in general and how the Metro budget goes for the court system. So as you said earlier, we are the smaller piece of that public justice piece of the pie of the budget. And for the court system overall, the entire budget is around $77.5 million for the court systems. That includes the courts. There are several different courts. There's juvenile court, there's general sessions court, there are the trial state courts, which include the circuit court and the criminal court. And with all of those courts, they each have their own clerks. I have the best clerk, Lionel Matthews, and his staff, and all of the other courts have their clerks as well. And literally without our clerks, and that's why I'm glad he's here with me today, is we could not handle the business of the courts. The clerks are the ones that keep the business, that keep the records, that keep the dockets, that keep the things flowing. And so we have to have the clerks with us as well. We do our budget together, our budget hearings together, because if there's a genius program that I think about and I say, ooh, we should try this new court, it affects the clerk's budget as well, because they would have to be the ones that staff that court and to be able to make sure that they are keeping up with all of the records for that court. Within that $77.5 million, it also includes the public defender's office, some of the money for the district attorneys that doesn't come from the state. It includes the probation departments, and all of that is within the entire court system enhancement budgets. So that's just a general overview of the entire court systems and what all goes into the funding. I am happy to represent the courts and say the juvenile court, I think, is by far the best, because if we do it right in juvenile court, and if we make sure that all of our children and families and our youth are getting the services that they need, then we are less likely to see people in the adult court system. And so that's why we put a lot of emphasis and a lot of effort on the programs that we do in juvenile court. We do get the highest number of budgets item in the metro government for the court system, because we actually have a higher number of staff members as well. So the juvenile court staff is about staff for about 120 people. And the juvenile court budget is about $14.7 million. And that doesn't include the grants that we also get. Within that, there's about $5.2 million that goes for the contract that we have for the Juvenile Detention Center. And that's about 36% of what the juvenile court budget is. The additional budget of the 56% is about $8.2 million, and that is for personnel and that is for staff. That includes the personnel for salaries and for fringe benefits and everything that goes into it. So literally about 91% of the juvenile court budget goes for staff operation as well as the contract detention facility that we have. There's about a remaining 8.2% of that budget. That goes for all of the extra stuff, the miscellaneous day-to-day operations. There's a $200,000 of that we actually operate grants for community organizations that work with juvenile. And the Metro Council has given us that opportunity to pick the ones that we feel that are most strongly need some of that money and that funds to give our customers the best services. And so that's about $200,000 of that 8%. The rest of it just literally goes for training, for miscellaneous operating stuff, copies, drug screens, whatever it is that we need to operate the actual budget. So in addition to the operating budget that we also have a number of grants. And the reason that we use grant funding is so that we can provide as many programs as possible in order to make a difference in the lives of our youth and our families. And for anybody that understands what juvenile court is, not just about the youth who've committed crimes. Juvenile court is for the best interest of all youth that come in through its center. We deal primarily, 2/3 of the cases that we deal with the parents of the children, whether it's a parentage action where we're determining custody, visitation, parenting time, child support, or Another portion of that is whether we are handling neglect, dependent, and abuse cases, the parents who are alleged to have abused or neglected their children. That's 2/3 of what the court operations are. And then the other third is for the youth and for the whether it's for a status offense, which is a crime because of their age, such as skipping school, or it's a crime, a delinquency, which is a crime at any age. And so when you look at all of those programs, all of the things that we have, it is our goal to prevent problems from happening and to promote the positive potential of all the youth and the families that come in there, and to make sure that we are pursuing fairness and hope for everyone that comes through the building. And so in order to do that, we have to have specialized programs. And so we spend a lot of grant funding on programs such as our Parental Assistance Court. That is a court that's designed to help parents learn how to get along and be better co-parents. We have our Safe Babies Court. That's for our babies from 0 to 3 who are being removed from their parents. That's a traumatic experience, and what we know by brain science, when you are removed from your parents between the ages of 0 and 3, which is the prime time period where your brain is developing, that can cause serious lifelong issues. And so we are putting specialized program through grants in order to address those problems. We have a grant program for our interpreter so that we can make sure that everyone who comes into the courtroom can be heard and can understand things. And so we contract to have an interpreter on staff at all times. We also have we use grant funding for other programs, such as some of our probation officers are paid through grants from the state as well. Many of these things that we do in order to make sure that our staff are taken care of. A lot of the training that we do, and I know Clerk Matthews is going to be asking for some extra training money, because our staff deal with trauma each and every day. And a lot of the things that they deal with, they have to understand adverse childhood experiences. They have to understand the benefits of positive behavior interventions. They have to understand what it means to be trauma and focused when they are working with our families. And that's not just for my staff, it's also for Clerk Matthews' staff as well, because they literally talk to people at the very beginning of the case. When people come into the court in crisis, they come to the clerk's office in crisis. And so we definitely need money for training and learning those things. We use a lot of our program money to make sure that we are providing the appropriate programs so that we can stop that school to prison pipeline, or literally what we call it is the cradle to prison pipeline, because we know it starts way before they even start in the school system. You know, the things that we are both looking forward to is that we know, as Sheriff Hall was just talking about, if you build the place where people can be restored, then you have a better opportunity to change the trajectory of their life. And so we are so grateful for the council for approving the sale of the Shrine Center on Brick Church Pike to help, hopefully, establish the Nashville Youth Campus for Empowerment, where we know that we're going to be providing a lot of different programs that are going to help all of our youth and all of our families. And so we're looking forward to that, and we know that that's going to be a game changer for the justice system in Nashville. Tennessee, the world. You want to add?
Thing I'll add is that our staff do a great job every day of working with the youth and families, parents that come into our facilities, and we do it on limited resources. We try to take every advantage to make sure that we're leveraging community resources and partnerships and collaborations with nonprofit partners in the community. And the new facility, the National Youth Campus for Empowerment, not only will be the right types of facilities to implement the type of programs we feel Nashville's youth need, it will also give us the ability to bring those collaborations in-house and house some of those nonprofit partners and make sure that when families come to see us at the Juvenile Justice Center, they can also see the partners and the programs and the resources that they need right there. And we don't lose families between the cracks of trying to send them other places for the resources and programs that they need. And so, again, we thank the council for their vote of confidence in us pursuing the Nashville Youth Campus for Empowerment. We thank our staff for the work that they do every day for our youth and families, and we thank our community partners for the collaboration and opportunity to leverage the resources in the community to really help the families that we serve.
Thank you. I think Councilmember Suara has some questions. I would love to just ask you to speak very briefly about restorative justice, and just to unpack that term that I think gets thrown around a lot without people necessarily understanding what that is. And then I'll recognize Councilmember Suara.
Absolutely. We currently have a pilot program for restorative justice. And when, as you said, a lot of people throw that term around and don't really understand what it truly means. And it doesn't mean that someone's going to get off with doing something harmful. What it means is that we are going to look at what caused that harm. And so instead of in a typical criminal justice system where you say who did the crime, what did they do, and what should their punishment be, what you look at is what was the harm that was done, who was harmed by this, and how do we heal or fix that harm. And the harm isn't always just about what happened in that crime. The harm can be very community deep. So let's say it's a home burglary. That affects the entire community where that home is, because people are scared now in their own community. People think that maybe the price of their housing is going to be affected because now they have a community that has home burglars. And so the harm is so much deeper than the actual offense. And so what has to happen is the person who caused that harm has to understand and be held accountable for what happened. And the best way that happens is if you have an opportunity for the people who are harmed to have a conversation, a meeting or a series of meetings with the person who caused the harm, and together figure out how that harm can be healed. For nations and cities that have restorative justice, the recidivism rate is less than 10% in most places. That means less than 10% of the people who commit a crime that go through a restorative justice program are least likely to ever return back into the system. And then for victims, those who were harmed, 95% of them are more satisfied with the restorative justice program than they are with the criminal justice program. And because in a restorative justice program, you can tell as the victim, you can say, this is how this hurt me. This is how I feel now. This is why I'm afraid to go into my house now. Whereas in a criminal trial, a victim doesn't necessarily have that opportunity to express how they're feeling. That's like hearsay, or that's against the rules of evidence, and that's not allowed in a criminal justice system. And so, at a restorative circle, they get to ask point blank, "Why did you pick my house?" or "Why did you pick me?" and can hear those answers, and that is part of the healing process. It is not healing to be in a witness stand and say, "Objection, you can't say that. Objection, you can't ask that." That's not healing, and very few people are healed through that type of process. But with the restorative justice process, everybody, including the community, is healed and has an opportunity to move forward and be restored.
Thank you for that explanation. I appreciate it. Councilmember Suara.
Thank you. I have 3 questions. I'll make them very fast. The first one is from our audience, and we thank him so much for being here and always asking great questions. It says, what existing or former pilot grant do you think will be most beneficial to integrate into your budget?
So for me, it is so important for us to integrate into our budget programs that will help support the youth and our families. particularly, we have designed a lot of different programs, such as we have a new program called our ARCH program. That is for private party petitioners someone lost custody of a child, and they're not working with the Department of Children's Services on how to get the child back. And so there's no one really helping the family that took the child or helping the family that lost the child. And these children end up falling through the cracks a lot and end up coming into the system as delinquent children later on because you lose so much in that process. And so now we have a new program that's helping support those families on both sides. And so that child is at the center of everything that we do, and that we're focusing on how do you heal that hurt that child has. There's a saying that says hurt people hurt people. And so if we don't start fixing the hurt early on with our programs, such as our Safe Babies Court, our ARCH program, then they end up in a place where they're hurting in the end and hurting others. And so those types of supporting funding for those types of programs would really make a difference in the way that we do business. We are optimistic and hopeful, particularly when we have our Nashville Youth Campus for Empowerment, that we're going to have a 24-hour assessment center. And our 24-hour assessment center is one of the biggest holes that we have in our system now. That 24-hour system assessment center is going to be for our youth that run away in the middle of the night, or that are out past curfew, or doing things in the nighttime that may not be a crime or detainable because it's a status offense, but it is a definitely big red herring. And so, like when Chief Drake said he's concerned when he sees 10 and 11-year-olds at 3 a.m. out in the street, there's something going on. And so if the charge is not a detainable charge, then they don't need to be in a detention facility. They can't be in a detention facility. But we can't just send them home without having proper services set up for them. And so what we can do with an assessment center, which is going to cost money to make sure that we have 24-hour services, is that we can immediately figure out, why is this child out at 2 o'clock in the morning? What was going on with the parents? What kind of help does the parent need? And that we can fix that right then and there. So I think our biggest dream together is to, along with, we've worked with the police department, the Office of Family Safety as well, on making sure that we have an assessment center.
I'll make this last one very quick. I know that you're doing a lot of work with the kids that come into the system that you see, and thank you for all the things that you're doing. I think it's great just hearing about what you put in there. Now, with the community partners, my question is, are we doing anything with just kids generally in the community? They're not in the system, the family is not, and we know that we need to find a way to engage youth before they even smell the system. And so you're building this empowerment center. Is it just for kids that are in this detention, being through court, or is it just something that will also spill into the community?
I 100% agree with you that we've got to get them before they come to the court system. The court system should be the last resort, and we should do more community programming outside of the court system. I will say that as a court, since we have been in administration, we are diverting more and more cases, because what the studies show is that if you divert them from the system, there's less likelihood that they'll ever come back into the system. And so we have diverted more than 75% of the cases now, and we're sending them through that diversion, through our diversion partnership program, where we're working with these community partners to make sure that they don't come back into the system. But absolutely, we should have more after-school programs. Our community centers need to be open longer with more constructive programs for every child that's in the community, with more programs, for all of them. Programs like the YMCA, they need to be better funded so that they can really provide more programs for our kids, because and what we also know, I think, is the time period that kids get in trouble the most is after school, before their parents get home.
So the last question that I want to ask you is not just in your capacity as the juvenile court judge. This is because you're sitting here as the court system representative. And, we heard the police talk about, or even the sheriff said, they have to pick people up because people are calling and we're just arresting people. And I know the buck stops at the court system. And we've heard stories about judges putting people in jail, things that could be thrown out that are not thrown out. I mean, there's a whole lot that the court system can do to help prevent how many people we have in our prisons. And so my question is, the juvenile court is doing a whole lot, right, to prevent and to help. Can you talk about the other court system that we have? If you can share and if you're in a position to, what are we doing to just increasing people in prison?
I could definitely, so that, do you want to?
Go ahead.
All right. I do think that we are doing, that the adult systems are also trying to do more, not to just continue to incarcerate, because incarceration is not the answer. In the way that in the United States, we view incarceration, or we do incarceration, it only exasperates the problem of the people that come in the system. When you look at countries like Norway and Sweden and Denmark, and you look at how constructive their incarceration, their jails, and I don't even know if they call them jails because they're so nice, how restorative and rehabilitative that they are, that's what we need as a model in the United States. And until we move to that, we're doing more harm by just simply incarcerating people over and over again. But I do know that our current DA, General Funk, is very supportive of restorative justice. And now that we've had a successful pilot program in juvenile court, I know that he wants to look at how he can extend that to the adult system as well. Judge Rachel Bell has done an amazing job of bringing in different programs, such as the program for the rent assistance. She's also done the young adult program, where she's got one of the few jurisdictions across the country that has grant funding to do special diversion programs for young adults, because young adults are the ones that fill our prisons that don't need to fill our prisons. When you look at the prison population, the highest percentage of people in prison are between 18 and 30. And so we're losing all of that young adult into the prison system, and we're giving them felonies, and we're preventing them when they get out from having good jobs and having the ability to get good housing, and taking away their opportunity to go to colleges and school. And so what do you get when they get out? You get worse. And so it's really great that Judge Bell saw that, or sees that, and is willing to have a program and to be the pilot person around the country to lead that, and to make sure that we are trying to divert as many of the young adults out of the system as well. Judge Blackburn does a great job with the Veterans Court and the Mental Health Court, and you have your specialized domestic violence courts that are doing a great job as well. So there are definitely efforts to make a difference in the things that we do instead of incarcerating, but actually providing programs and opportunities to heal the harms and do the things that are necessary to change people's hearts.
Thank you. I appreciate that list. And I think Nashville is, I don't know that we're unique in having that many diversionary courts, but I think we've certainly been very intentional about it. And I appreciate that we've built upon that year after year. Again, we could go on forever. This is great information, and I do appreciate you giving the overview for all the courts, because that's very helpful. But again, I'm so excited about what I'm hearing going on in juvenile court, and if we can catch them young, then they can become productive citizens and be part of the solution. So I'm grateful for what y'all do. This ends tonight's Budget 101. We have taped all this so that, it will be watched in the future, and I think a lot of people are going to gain a greater understanding of how money is spent on public safety, and that it is not every dollar going to lock people up. There's an awful lot of other things going on, and we continue to learn and look toward a future where we can divert more and more of that to services to help people. So Judge Callaway and Clerk Matthews, thank you so much for rounding out this program. I will end Budget 101, and we will see you next week talking about infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.